By the end of last summer, I had 12 productive tomato plants in my garden, and I had paid for exactly one of them. The other 11 came out of less than $2 worth of material sitting in my kitchen drawer: a handful of plastic cups, one aspirin tablet, clean water from the tap. The conventional approach is to drive down to the garden centre every May and load up on transplants at $4 or $5 a piece. I did it that way for years. Some seasons I spent $40 on plants before the soil was warm. The method I'm going to walk you through replaces that whole transaction with about $2 and one good starter plant. I uncovered this technique in a United States Department of Agriculture pamphlet from 1943. Found it in a cardboard box at a flea market over in Black Mountain. Paid $1 for it. The pamphlet was teaching families how to feed themselves during wartime when seed and transplants were rationed and you could not just drive to a garden centre. The trick they taught is the same trick I am going to show you today. Stay with me to the end, because I am going to share the modification I tested that lets you skip the seedling buying step entirely the following spring, even if you live in a cold climate. Let me be honest with you. I did this the wrong way for the first 12 years I gardened on this property. Every spring I drove to the nursery, looked at the rows of six-packs and loaded up. $30, $40, sometimes more. I would lose 2 or 3 to transplant shock or a late frost. I would drive back, spend another $20. If you have been doing this, you are not alone. I was right there with you for 2 decades. The garden centre system is convenient and it works. There is nothing wrong with it, but it is not the only way. And it is not the way American gardeners did it for most of this country's history. Here is the part most gardeners do not know. During World War II, the United States Department of Agriculture published a series of pamphlets aimed at home gardeners. Seed was rationed. Transplants were not always available. Families were being asked to feed themselves so commercial production could go to the troops. At the peak, in 1944, Victory Gardens produced roughly 40% of the fresh vegetables consumed in this country. That is a country feeding itself out of its own backyards. The pamphlet I found teaches a simple propagation method any household could run on the kitchen counter. After the war, when commercial seed companies and garden centres expanded, that knowledge got displaced. Big agriculture profits when you buy. It does not profit when you propagate. There is no conspiracy here. There is just an industry whose business model points the other way. All right, let us keep going. Here is what you need to understand before we start cutting anything. Not every tomato plant works for this. You need an indeterminate variety. What I mean by that is indeterminate tomatoes keep growing and producing suckers all season. Determinate varieties, the bushy patio types, stop suckering once they hit final size. If you try this with a determinate, you will get 1 or 2 attempts and the plant will be done. For your starter, pick an indeterminate heirloom or open pollinated variety. Brandywine, Cherokee Purple, and Black Crim are 3 I have grown for years here in Zone 7A, and they all sucker heavily. A hybrid will work too. Suckers are clones, not seeds, so a hybrid passes its exact traits to the new plant, but heirlooms tend to have more vigour in propagation. When you walk into the garden centre, do not grab the smallest plant to save money. Pick the most vigorous one you can find, strong stem, dark green leaves. That plant is going to become 12 plants by August. It is worth the extra $1. Now let me show you exactly what a sucker is. Most gardeners walk past these things every day without realising what they are looking at. A sucker is the new shoot that grows in the V between the main stem and a true leaf branch. Look at your tomato plant. The main stem goes up. The leaf branches come out to the sides. Right in that crotch, where the leaf meets the stem, a third shoot starts growing upward. That is a sucker. Most pruning advice tells you to remove them and throw them away because they steal energy from fruit production. They are not wrong about that, but you do not have to throw them away. You can root them. Take suckers when they are 4 to 6 inches long. Smaller than that, they root slow. Bigger than that, they wilt before the roots set. Use clean, sharp scissors. Cut at the base, right where the sucker meets the main stem. Do this in the early morning before the heat. The plant is full of water at that hour, and your success rate jumps when the sucker goes into the cup hydrated. How many can you take from one plant? More than you think. A vigorous indeterminate will produce a new sucker every 3 to 4 days through July and August. Here is where the $2 comes in. And here is the science. Take 1 uncoated aspirin tablet, 325 milligrams, the cheapest bottle at the pharmacy. Dissolve it in 1 quart of clean water. Tap water is fine if you let it sit out for an hour first so the chlorine can evaporate. The aspirin contains salicylic acid. That is a real plant signaling compound. Plants produce it themselves when they are under stress. When you give a cutting a dose of it from the outside, it triggers the plant to put down roots faster than it would on its own. Research out of Penn State and other extension programs on salicylic acid and willow water solutions has shown rooting success rates well above 90% on tomato cuttings. Strip the lower leaves off your sucker, leave 2 or 3 leaves at the top, drop the cutting into a plastic cup with about 2 inches of the aspirin solution, set it on a windowsill out of direct sun. Now here is the part most people skip. Change the water every 3 days. Bacteria builds up fast in a warm cup. Old water turns the developing roots brown and slimy. Fresh water every 3 days with a fresh dose of aspirin, and you will see white root tips within 7 to 10 days. That is the trick. That is the entire $2 trick. Now, before we get into the transplant piece, I want to share something with you. If what I am walking you through here is making sense, and you are starting to see how much of yield is a measurement problem rather than a luck problem, the full system is laid out in my book, Steve's 30-Day Maximum Yield Protocol. Chapter 4 is the pruning chapter. It includes diagrams showing which suckers to remove for yield and which to keep, plus the 2-litre training system I use on every indeterminate I grow. It is $17 at stevesgardenbooks.com. If you're on a phone or laptop, the link is in the description. If you're watching on the television, grab your phone and point it at the QR code on screen. Take your time. I will be right here. All right, let us keep going. Here is where most people lose the plants they work so hard to root. Move them when the roots are 1 to 2 inches long, no longer. Water roots are thinner and more fragile than soil roots. The longer the cutting sits in water, the more committed it gets to water. Make the move while it is still adaptable. Do not go straight from cup to garden bed. Too big a step. Go cup, then a 4-inch nursery pot with light potting mix, then garden. Use a soilless mix or a raised bed blend. Garden soil from your yard is too dense for these new roots. The pot stage is 1 to 2 weeks. Keep it moist, not wet. The mix should feel like a wrung-out sponge, then harden off for 5 to 7 days before the plant goes into the bed. 2 hours of morning sun on day 1. 4 hours by day 3. Full sun by day 7. On zone adaptations, if you are in zones 5 and 6, start this cycle by early July to get a fall crop. In zones 7 and 8, where I am in the foothills, you have until late August. In zones 9 and 10, you can run this almost year-round. The signal that the plant has accepted the move is the first new true leaves coming out of the growing tip. When you see that, you have a plant. Same DNA as the parent, same flavor, same disease resistance, for about 17 cents in materials. Now here is where this method really earns its keep. This is the part that turns one plant into infinite vegetables. Most gardeners plant once in May and harvest one wave in late July and early August. The plants peak together. The kitchen fills up with fruit for 2 weeks. By September, production drops off a cliff. I did it that way for 15 years. What I found when I tested propagation as a continuous schedule is that you can stagger your harvest from June through October. Here is the rotation. Plant your starter in May like you always do. 3 weeks. In. Take your first round of suckers and root them. 3 weeks after that, take a second round, including suckers off your now rooting first round. 3 weeks after that, a third round. Each wave is about 30 days behind the wave before it in fruit set. By August, you have a continuous cascade. The original starter is winding down. The first propagated round is peaking. The second is just starting to set fruit. The third is establishing roots in the bed. I tested this in my test bed for 2 seasons against a single planting of the same variety. The continuous wave bed produced fruit from the second week of June through the first hard frost in late October. The single planting bed produced for about 5 weeks and was done. Every plant is a little factory. The factory has a production schedule. You are not adding more factories, you are scheduling the shifts. A good harvest starts 30 days before the first pick. Let me walk through the patterns I see when people try this and the cuttings fail. I made all of these myself before I figured them out. The first pattern is taking suckers that are too big. Folks wait until the suckers are 8 or 10 inches because they think bigger is better. Those suckers cannot pull enough water through their stem to support all that leaf area before the roots establish. They wilt and they do not recover. 4 to 6 inches is the window. The second pattern is using tap water straight from the faucet without letting the chlorine evaporate. Most municipal water has enough chlorine to suppress the bacteria you want, but it also kills the delicate root tissue as it tries to form. 1 hour sitting out in an open container, and the chlorine is gone. The third pattern is not changing the water. People set the cup on the windowsill and walk away for 2 weeks. The water turns murky. The roots come out brown and slimy and rot the minute they hit soil. Every 3 days. Fresh water. Fresh aspirin solution. The fourth pattern, and the one that killed the most of my early attempts, is moving the cutting straight from water to garden bed. Water roots cannot handle dense garden soil. Use the pot stage. Now here is what I promised at the start, the modification that lets you skip the seedling buying step entirely the following spring. In late August, take one good sucker off your best plant. Root it the way I just showed you. But instead of transplanting it outdoors, move it to a 6-inch pot and bring it indoors before the first frost. Set it on a south-facing windowsill. Keep the soil barely moist, the plant will go semi-dormant, it will not produce fruit, and it will not look impressive. What it will do is hold the variety alive through winter. In March, when most people are starting seeds, you take fresh suckers off that overwintered plant and root them again. By May, when your neighbours are at the garden centre, you already have 6 established plants ready for the bed. I tested this for 3 seasons. It works. All right, before I let you go, one more thing. What I shared today is one piece of a much bigger system. The full 30-day protocol is what took my plot from acceptable yields to 45 pounds of tomatoes off 3 plants. It is 115 pages, day by day, covering the soil reset chapter with its nutrient availability chart by pH, the 3-phase feeding calendar with specific amendment rates for each growth stage, and the troubleshooting chart for the 7 most common yield killers. $17 at stevesgardenbooks.com. Link in the description if you're on a phone or laptop. QR code on screen if you're watching on the television. If you're tired of decent results and you're ready to start measuring, that is the book for you. That is the trick. 1 plant, $2, and a kitchen counter. Try it on 1 starter plant this season and compare against the rest of your row. That is how you will know. All right, that is what I have for you today. I will see you in the next one.